Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming.
To do with Africa, the Caribbean, or any Latino country or culture whatsoever. It is a foundational Black American holiday. That's it, that's all. It is specifically Black American only. And it damn sure ain't got nothing to do with that Pan-Africanism shit. It ain't got nothing to do with the red, green, and black colors. It don't have nothing to do with none of that. It's about our bloodline, our history, and our heritage, and then our victory. And if you ain't a part of that, it ain't no hate to you, but it ain't got nothing to do with you at all, whatsoever. Cry about it. June 19th, 1865. That was when the last group of enslaved Black Americans in Galveston, Texas found out that they were finally free. And this was 2.5 years after they were supposed to have already had been free. The Emancipation Proclamation. That didn't happen in the Caribbean, that didn't happen in Africa, and it damn sure didn't happen in Latin America. It happened.
Without Mexico, we wouldn't have Juneteenth. Let's get into it. So it's no secret that Texas was once part of Mexico and Mexico was once part of New Spain. So Galveston, Texas obviously wasn't a part of Mexico at the time Juneteenth happened in 1865. But since the inhabitants of what is now Texas have been a part of New Spain since the 1500s, that's 300 years before the Anglos came, and with people like Esteban, who was a Moroccan Moor who was shipwrecked in Galveston, Texas in the 1500s, there is ample evidence that there was once a thriving Black indigenous community in New Spain and Mexico in what is now Texas. And these African descendants occupied every rung of the economic ladder. And remember, New Spain and Mexico allowed racial mixing. So many of these people were indigenous, European, and of African descent. And that was the problem for the Anglos. The Anglos loathed race mixing, and the Mexicans wanted to be a race-free society. After all, there was only 3,000 enslaved people left in Mexico by the time Mexico gained its independence from Spain. And by the time Texas became part of the United States, many of these Mexicans did not leave Texas. They just became Americans. And in 1850, there were around 14,000 people of Mexican origin living in Galveston. And the Mexicans brought their culture with them to Galveston, and that meant racial mixing and treating Blacks and indigenous people as if they were not inferior. And this infuriated the Anglos. This Anglo said that low, unprincipled white men who, because they are conscious they do not deserve the respect of decent persons of their own color, resort to Negrodom for society and sympathy. If such practices were left unchecked by proper authorities, the editor warned, we will ere long have a Southampton insurrection or a general Negro stampede from Mexico. And then it goes on to say the degree of interracial socialization in Galveston worried the slaveholding elite to such an extent that the city repeatedly passed laws carrying increasingly harsh penalties designed to draw more clearly the color line between Black and white workers. Many of those free white people lived in the territory when it was a part of Mexico, and they were used to intermingling with Black and Indians. Even more, Galveston, Texas did not allow free people of color to live in their city because of the fear that they would aid the enslaved people. There were only 2 free people of color living in Galveston, Texas by 1860. So this region that was once a free territory where people had been living free for generations, for the Anglos to come and bring back enslavement and re-enslave people that were once free, this didn't sit well with the Mexicans because they were living under a free society before the Anglos came. So they aided many enslaved people to freedom. And once they became free and a part of Mexican society, their racial classification was lost. So today, many of the descendants like Diana and Sophia who fit the public perception of what a Latino should look like. So if it wasn't for the Mexicans participating in racial mixing for hundreds of years before the Anglos arrived and still refusing to abide by the Anglo law once they did arrive, maybe, just maybe, the enslaved people of Galveston, Texas may have gotten word that they were free sooner. But the Anglos made sure to have an iron fist on their enslaved people in Galveston, Texas because of the threat of freedom that was so imminent being that close to Mexico. From being the first territory to be free in what is now the U.S. to the last territory to be free, that must have really affected the enslaved people of Galveston, Texas.
Yesterday was Cinco de Mayo and I kept seeing a lot of questions like this. I wonder if Mexicans celebrate Juneteenth. Did you know that there's communities in Mexico that do celebrate Juneteenth? And it's actually known as El Día de los Negros. This holiday is heavily celebrated in northern Mexico, specifically in a little village called El Nacimiento de los Negros, Coahuila, Mexico. Well, check this out. The descendants of Black Seminoles, known as Muskogos, have been celebrating this holiday for over 100 years. And it's to honor their ancestors who fled slavery in the United States and sought freedom in Mexico during the 1850s. This celebration features horse parades, music, and traditional foods like tetepun and barbecue. Tetepun is sweet potato bread. But isn't it crazy that even though this is a celebration in Mexico, a lot of Mexicans in the United States don't celebrate it? Yeah, one of the reasons why a lot of Mexicans in the United States don't celebrate it is because they unfortunately do not know their Mexican history. Education is key, and our history was whitewashed. Fortunately, these last 20 years in Mexico, the government has been trying very hard to unerase Afro-Mexican history, along with indigenous history. We have a lot of Black communities in Mexico and a lot of parts of Central America. And it's not just because a lot of enslaved Black people fled to Mexico. It's also because during the transatlantic slave trade, Mexico, or Central America, was the third biggest population of African slaves, way more than the United States. But the reason why we see a lot of racism and colorism within the Mexican or Latin community is because of the caste system. It is why it's very important to share our history to end that systemic racism that has been implemented by the oppressor. But did you know this? Let me know what you think in the comments below.
Think of the history of slavery here in Texas, we think of Juneteenth in Galveston. But I'm speaking with a couple of historians today who say we need to think of that history even further south because decades before Juneteenth, Hispanics were helping enslaved Blacks escape to Mexico.
The Mexican government welcomed fugitive slaves.
Documents dating back beyond the 1800s here in the Galveston and Texas History Center that historians Samuel Collins III and Dr. Juan Galvan are showing me give a new outlook on the Underground Railroad, which most equate to the system that helped slaves escape north to freedom.
We often think about Canada, but enslaved people in Texas actually ran south to Mexico because Mexico had outlawed slavery.
Although not everyone describes the help Hispanics gave as work on the railroad.
Because when you say Underground Railroad, that implies a network as sophisticated as the one to Canada.
But Dr. Galvan says research shows Hispanic abolitionists were well organized as many came together to help thousands of enslaved Blacks in Texas make it to freedom in Mexico.
There were many marriages between Mexican men and African-American enslaved women.
Part of the story is that people were not just waiting to be rescued.
Collins says some slaves saved for years to pay to be taken to Mexico. When Texas was still Mexican territory, it was illegal to have slaves here. So slave owners began drafting contracts like this. The papers would claim the people listed, including some as young as 3 years old, agreed to work for them for life.
For the term of 99 years to learn the art and mystery of forming and planting.
So friends to the South stepped in.
In 1857, the government of Mexico amends the Constitution now, declaring that any former slave who steps on Mexican territory is now a Mexican citizen and therefore a free person.
Once slaves escaped to Mexico, many made good lives, including a couple of Sam Houston's former slaves.
One of them became a barber and opened a barber shop in Matamoros, Mexico. Another one became an officer in the Mexican army.
And these are just a few of the books available on the topic. The historians are encouraging you to head to the library and get to know the information for yourself.
These are the sights and sounds of El Día de los Negros, or Day of the Blacks, celebrated on Juneteenth in a town called Nacimiento de los Negros in Coahuila, Mexico.
My name is Ashley Rodriguez, and I'm a descendant of the Black Seminole Indian. My first time actually going to Nacimiento, I was I think 5 or 6 years old. And then from then on, we'll kind of make trips periodically down to Nacimiento to celebrate Juneteenth. Nobody really knows about the Mexican side of it.
Nacimiento de los Negros, which translates to birthplace of the Blacks, is the town where the Black Seminoles, or Negros Muskogos, settled in 1849, just a few hours south of the Texas border. They are descended from slaves who escaped to Florida and later made their way down to Mexico.
We're talking about the 18th century, more or less. When they got to Florida, they mixed culturally with the Indian Seminoles, and they became the Black Seminoles. They were removed during the Trail of Tears to Oklahoma, which was then the Indian Territory.
So once they got to Oklahoma, where they told them that they would be free and have land, they realized that it wasn't true, it was a lie, and they can come and take them anytime they wanted to, the masters. So they decided, they had to leave.
So it was a very harsh, terrible journey that our people had to go through to get to freedom. They didn't allow them freedom there in Oklahoma, and John, Horse, and Wildcat, they heard, that there's a place in Mexico that they could go to, that they could be free.
Mexico needed to hire people to defend the border from the possibility of more U.S. invasion. So what happened with the Black Seminoles is that they managed to negotiate a deal with the Mexican state in exchange for land and citizenship.
Karina and Dina grew up knowing little about their heritage, but are now dedicated to preserving their stories.
We knew that my grandfather on my mom and my dad's side, they were both Black Seminoles, so we didn't know anything else. That's what we're working with, my cousins and I, on, teaching the history and preserving, the traditions.
Thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done. Allah will be thy name.
One of our cousins, Bertha Benson, had did a YouTube video for Siska, and it was talking about how the Seminole language was a lost language. And I didn't want that language to be lost, because that's part of my history, that's part of my family. So that's when I started to research more and learn about my history.
Part of remembering their traditions is traveling to Nacimiento every year on Juneteenth to celebrate with the town.
We have June 19 in Mexico, but we didn't know it as June 19. We knew it as El Baile de los Negros, El Día del Negro. We take food, drinks, because that's mainly what it is. It's like a big party, like a big family reunion.
Celebrating Juneteenth, it's more how I perceive it. It's with my ancestors freeing themselves from slavery, unlike with the American government being the ones to initiate it. It means so much to me. It means that for one, I am also a unique individual that comes from such a rich history that is so unknown. With the recent events that have happened here within the past years, with, of course, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and all of that, I feel that I'm also a part of that community. Since we are descendants of African descent, we also tie into that as well.
There's a group of African American descendants that speak Creole and celebrate Juneteenth in Mexico. And they basically got there because people are really annoying and wouldn't leave them alone. In the early 1800s, there were some slaves from the South that went to Florida, which was ruled by Spain at the time. And they formed communities with the Seminoles, and they lived as freed slaves until Andrew Jackson came along and took over Florida. And he started capturing and unaliving a lot of the Black Seminoles. And then he sent them to Oklahoma. And once the Black Seminoles got to Oklahoma, they still wouldn't leave them alone, and they were still getting attacked and captured and unalived. So the Black Seminoles were like, we're just going to go to Mexico. And when they got to Mexico, Mexico's like, we're going to give you 70,000 acres and all this money and this livestock, but you do have to secure the borders. And they were like, deal. So they basically fought off like indigenous raids and Texas slave owners that came looking to recapture their slaves. And a lot of the Black Seminoles did stay in Mexico, but a lot of them went back to the United States. However, the Black Seminoles that stayed in Mexico do speak Creole, and they celebrate Juneteenth to show solidarity with their American counterparts.
Are you celebrating Juneteenth today? Well, did you know that a village in Mexico has been celebrating it for over 150 years? That's because thousands of formerly enslaved people were in search of freedom in northern Mexico and settled in Coahuila, close to the Texas border. There's even a small town with the name of Nacimiento de los Negros, which literally translates into birthplace of the Black people. And many of them were Negros Mascogos or Black Seminoles, former slaves that were also part of a Native American group. And so they traveled south of the border, and many families still celebrate that today.
Nobody really knows about the Mexican side of it. And so whenever I would, tell people, oh yeah, I celebrate Juneteenth and all that, they're like, well, yeah, I celebrate that too. But I'm like, no, I go to Mexico and I celebrate that.
So it would kind of get them confused. Like,
And some of them still eat their traditional food and sing.
Our Father, who art in heaven, our Father, hallowed be thy name.
Pretty cool to keep these traditions alive, right? Follow me on Instagram for more.
Our roots are here. For us, everything began here.
It is a place most people have likely never heard of, much less visited, and one that many have left behind over the years. In the north-central section of the Mexican state of Coahuila, it sits just 115 miles from the Texas border, 450 miles from Houston, and 500 miles from Galveston. A village hours away, yet closely connected to the tradition of Juneteenth. It's interesting, the farther we drive into Mexico through towns like Sabinas and Musquis, the closer we actually get to Black history, which is also Mexican history. That history took KPRC2 to Nacimiento de los Negros, in Spanish, Birth of the Blacks.
They got here July 12, 1850 to Coahuila.
Karina Torralba, who now lives in San Antonio, was born and raised in Nacimiento. Torralba grew up celebrating Juneteenth with the entire village. She has traveled back to Nacimiento to mark the holiday almost every year of her life. Like most people here today, she is an ethnic mix of Mexican, African, and Seminole, descendants of the Negros Mascogos, the phrase for Black Seminoles.
And if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't have what we have here today. You know, this land, you know, this freedom.
So how did they wind up here in Mexico, and whatever caused them to start celebrating Juneteenth?
The history of Mascogos is so important here in Mexico because they grew up helping the government when the other groups were harming the land.
They started as escaped slaves from South Carolina and Georgia, taken in by the Seminole tribe in Florida in the 1820s. In the following decade, they were forced to Oklahoma, along with several other tribes, during what was known as the Trail of Tears. Although many had intermarried with the Florida Seminoles, because of their noticeably darker skin, they were under constant threat of kidnapping by slave traders. They eventually fled to Texas, then Mexico, where slavery had been abolished in 1829. The government granted them citizenship based on several stipulations. If the Black Seminoles would defend the country's northern border and take Mexican names, they would receive money, livestock, and tools, plus 70,000 acres of land. They defended for several years, and they received the land that became Nacimiento.